All right, kids, here we go. It's the last video, this time I promise, right, for chapter 11. And it should be reasonably short, so hopefully by the end. After this, look for an email that'll tell you what we're going to do as far as the test is concerned for chapters 10 and 11 and the review process. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is the challenge of feeding this growing population. If you guys remember back when we talked about Malthus and his predictions that at some point in time, our ability to feed people is going to exceed the number of people that are on the planet. And while that hasn't really happened, we do know that even though we produce plenty of food in the world, that we are having difficulties getting it to people. And that's a problem, and that causes suffering that the Neo-Malthusians talk about. But the fact is that food scarcity, the inability to get food, remains a challenge for millions of people around the world. We know in the United States, 1 out of every 6 children goes to bed hungry every night. Right, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, one of the most developed countries in the world, a country that makes enough food to feed the world, we have trouble getting food to the people who actually need it. Right, nearly 1 billion people in the world, outside the United States, or including the United States, are malnourished. They don't get sufficient amounts of food. It's not just not having enough and feeling hungry, it's that they're not getting the nutrients that are necessary to sustain life and for people to thrive. Part of the reason is inadequate distribution systems. Right? If we don't have the ability to get it to the countries that actually need it, people are going to have issues. Also, widespread poverty. Right? I can make all the food in the world, but if you can't afford to buy it, then you can be malnourished. Malnutrition is a key factor in the death of more than 2.3 million children who don't reach the age of 5. Right? So of those children that die under the age of 5, child mortality, right? 2.3 million of them are in part because of malnutrition. And think about it, right? Malnutrition causes you to have a weakened immune system, right? It causes you to have weakened muscle and skeletal systems. So any disease that might affect a number of your systems are going to be weakened, right? And can get in easier if those systems are weakened by malnutrition. Climate change is also introducing new problems that may affect our ability to feed the world, right? We know that because of climate change, there are extended droughts throughout all of the world. There are, because of our use of chemicals, right, and the use of, because of climate change, there are new little pests, right, that are evolving to meet these new changes that we haven't been able to deal with yet. And additionally, too, growing conditions have been altered. Right? We have less fertile soil, less rainfall, that can cause, crops to be less successful than they were. 3 interrelated issues that contribute to food insecurity. Right? One is declining control over local food sources. Because we have more and more commercial farms, local systems don't have the same control over food resources that they used to. For people who are poor, right, or people who are of the wrong gender, women, small children, people who don't have access to political power, that lack of political power can lead to additional food insecurities. And the political economic structures that we've talked about that lead to inequality, right? The haves and the have-nots, right? There are less haves and more have-nots, and the inability of people to pay for the services that they need, including the ability to find food. Add to those, in other places around the world, you have corrupt governments that will literally divert food from one group to another, will keep it for the haves and not give it to the have-nots. Institutional inefficiencies, so groups that are supposed to distribute food aren't doing it in the right way. I think if you look at the system with the coronavirus now, right, we have states competing against each other, which are competing against the federal government, and we're not getting an efficient distribution of different resources to the various places that are needed. Kind of an example. And then power struggles, right? We see it in our own government. You have two political parties who are constantly at war with each other. And when people are at war with each other, things are not getting done the way that they should. As I said before, 1 in 6 children in the United States suffers from food insecurity. We know that hunger and poverty and the inability to find food is not limited to the periphery. It exists in all places around the world, including those countries that are so much more developed and poor. All right, another issue is what you see here in the map, and that is the loss of fertile, productive farmland. As we grow in a population, right, we need to have more housing. We need to have retail developments, right, schools, hospitals, things that people need in order to have a quote-unquote normal life. If you look at this here, you're seeing the map. The red areas, high quality farmland that exists in areas where we have high development. Gosh darn it, I'm really getting, whoop. Well, we'll try, but it's gone. High quality farmland, right, land that is producing well, but it's also in the path of high development. So more and more of those areas are in conflict. Do we keep the farmland to feed people, or do we develop it for housing? And then the green areas are showing where there's low quality or high quality farmland and low development, where people just aren't moving to. And then other issues, urban, federal, and Indian land, and other land being used for various different purposes. This is not limited to the United States. All right, there are many places around the world that have high quality farmland, but are in the path of development. And it's not just people wanting to have a house to live in, right? This is also places where people want to have another house, right? A lake house, a vacation home, where they want to get away from, to get away from it all. Sometimes you'll see places here in East Texas that we've talked about before where there's a lot of chicken farming. People are saying, well, we need to have less chicken farms so I can have more of a pleasant experience. I don't want to live downwind from, a chicken processing plant. So you have people demanding that existing businesses move to accommodate their development. You also have increasing environmental standards. Like we saw in North Carolina, where people are dumping pig waste into the rivers. People want to have higher quality levels of water. Right? Needless to say, that's not an unreasonable request. But what do you do with all of that? Right? Even though we may not like it, the fact is that the pig waste exists, and there's something that we got to do with it in order to make the environment better. Right? And the fact is, too, that all these problems mean less farmland, which means that we are producing less. The demand is still high, and that drives up the price, which even exacerbates the problem of food insecurity with people who don't have enough money. Food gets higher and higher. We've seen it just recently, too. If you look at the people who are hoarding during the COVID-19 epidemic, or pandemic, excuse me, people hoarding food and other products, the prices are going up. I mean, you can buy a bottle of hand sanitizer on Amazon for over $100. So as demand increases, supply shrinks, prices go up, and people have even more issues. All right, the last one we're going to talk about, it's our little, come on, there we go. The last slide in this chapter is something that I hope that you've heard before. It's kind of been a big deal here in Dallas over the last 4 or 5 months. And this is the idea of food deserts. All right, a food desert is an area where people have limited access, not just to food, but to particular categories, right? Fresh and nutritious foods. We all have access to something. We can go down to, the 7-Eleven and buy a bunch of processed foods, but we don't all have access to things like fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats, things that are far more nutritious, but sometimes can be difficult to come by. All right, we're looking at a map of Oregon, right, and we can see where the population centers are. Portland, Salem, Eugene, Bend, Medford. But as you move away, there's less and less population, right? And I'm not going to put a grocery store in a place where there aren't enough people to support it. So the dots are different cities, different areas where you find a large or medium supermarket. And those large and medium supermarkets are typically where you will find the fresh fruits. And as you move out, right, it is becoming further and further away from those markets, particularly in areas that are not necessarily so populated. But you will also know that there are places within populated areas, right, usually low-income neighborhoods, where a medium or a large grocery store just aren't found. There was a couple of articles, news reports in the Dallas area of a couple of supermarkets in low-income areas that were closing. And why is that a problem? Well, let's just go to another one. Well, if you don't have access to a car, right, then it's not easy to get to the grocery store. Public transportation is available, but I recall the story where it was at least a mile walk from the closest bus stop to the grocery store. So imagine walking a mile from the bus stop to the grocery store, then walking back to the bus stop, right, and then taking it to your home. Right, it's inconvenient, and for some people it's not possible. Right, if they're working, maybe that grocery store isn't going to be open when they need to go there, or the bus routes don't travel there. So they go to the 7-Eleven or the local gas station, and then those are the foods that they eat. Right, so they eat are mostly processed foods that are energy dense but nutrient poor. Unhealthy foods are purchased because they're typically cheaper than fresh fruits and vegetables. And if you don't have transportation, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make, or it may be impossible to make the effort to get there. What that means is that we are filling ourselves up with processed high-calorie foods that don't do a lot for our bodies. The rate of obesity is greater in areas where you find a food desert than if you looked in rural areas where, like, a farm is, if you're living on a farm kind of thing. So places, even living in an urban area where you would think it shouldn't be a problem, can be a problem because of the fact that sometimes people don't put these large grocery stores in income-poor areas. It's not economically feasible or profitable to be in those areas, so they're not going to go. What does that do to our kids? Right? You guys know if you don't have a good breakfast, you're not you're not awake in my class half the time anyway, but you're not awake, you're not able to learn as much as if you are filled with good and nutritious food. So we're raising children who are obese, and a population that's becoming more obese as time goes on, plus kids who are just not in a position to learn. So lack of agriculture, right, causes a lot of problems for a good, healthy, and educated populace. Right? So as we finish up this chapter, right, know that agriculture is the beginning and the ending of everything. If we didn't have agriculture, we wouldn't have civilizations, cities, and all the innovations that go with that. Language, religion, architecture, all the different things that are required because of city living don't come about unless we have good agriculture in order to feed an ever-growing population. And while it starts everything too, it is also the end game, right? We have to have agriculture in order to feed everybody that's living on this planet. And not just to feed them something, but to feed them something nutritious so that they can participate in the society. All right, that's the end of chapter 11. We're going to move on then to the review after you guys finish today's assignments. And hopefully we'll do it on Zoom, and I'll see you then.